Hey, what's going on, guys? It's been a minute. I'm just out here in the garage today kind of messing around with the old Turbo IS300 and figured I would do something a little bit different, and that is we're going to do just a quick compression test of the engine just to kind of see where things are at. I picked up this, relatively inexpensive compression tester kit just off of Amazon, and I've been wanting to try it out, so figured that we might as well do it on the Turbo IS300. So I don't really have any reason to think that there's something wrong with the engine. It seems to be running just as strong as when I put it together, a few years ago. So this is more just kind of out of curiosity and to kind of proactively just check up on the engine and make sure that there are no issues going on. So I don't really expect to find anything wrong, but anything can happen, so we'll see how it goes. So when it comes to a compression test, the main thing that you're looking for is obviously consistency between all of the cylinders. So I think for a built engine like this, something around 10% variance between all the cylinders should be perfectly acceptable. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping to see when I do the test. So I guess another thing worth mentioning here quick before I start the test is that I know the compression of this engine in particular is going to be pretty low, based on the parts that I used when I put it together a few years ago. So it has 8.5:1 pistons, a GTE head gasket, and the GE VVTi cylinder head. So the combination of those parts usually makes for, a pretty low compression ratio. So that being said, the engine has always performed exceptionally well, both in and out of boost. And the response has always been great. I've never had any issues or complaints with the compression ratio being as low as it is. So just to kind of reiterate, I'm not really concerned with the compression values themselves. I'm more concerned with the consistency of compression across all 6 cylinders. And also, the engine is ice cold, hasn't been started in a few days, so this is a cold compression test, which will typically yield lower results than a warm engine because the pistons and other components of the engine will slightly expand as they get up to operating temperature and in turn kind of increase the compression a little bit. So I'm going to start digging into this thing. Just got to get the coils out of the way, which luckily isn't a huge deal. I can actually just leave all the coils attached to the bracket and pull the whole bracket itself. And then once the spark plugs are exposed, obviously we'll pull all the plugs out and then start hooking up the compression tester to each cylinder. So I'll probably end up testing each cylinder 2 or 3 times just to make sure that the results for each cylinder are consistent. And also I'm definitely going to hook up a battery charger, because the last thing you want in the middle of a compression test is for the battery to die and you gotta wait for it to charge. So I'm gonna hook up a charger right from the beginning just to make sure that the battery stays charged and strong during the compression test, because I think you want a strong cranking battery for the entire test. So So got all the spark plugs pulled out, no issues there. I'm just going to thread this end of the compression tester in here. There's a rubber O-ring on it, so Just kind of go till it's hand tight. And then it's got a nice little quick connect fitting that goes onto the gauge. So I'll probably change the camera angle here so we can watch the gauge as I'm cranking it over. So another thing I'm doing really quick is just basically disabling all of the injector and coil outputs through the AEM tuner software. So obviously the coils are unplugged, and I won't even have the main fuel pump running, so it doesn't really matter if the injectors are operating. But this is super easy to do. It's literally a few clicks, and now the ECM won't command any of the injectors or coils to try and fire while I'm cranking it over for the test. So kind of overkill, but something I like to do anyway. Alright, so I got the spark plugs all pulled out. I've got the battery charger hooked up, and the compression tester is connected to cylinder number 1. So I guess let's start checking the compression of this pile. .105. All right. Okay, here we go with cylinder number 2. .115. Here we go with cylinder number 3. .110 on the money. Okay. .107, we'll call it. So far, I'm happy with the results. We'll see how cylinder number 5 does now. .115. Okay, here we go for cylinder number 6. What? 86? Let's try that again. Okay. 86. Yikes. Let me make sure this is installed right, because that's a little concerning. O-ring is still there. Alright, it's nice and tight. Let's try it again. .86. Wow. It definitely doesn't sound the same as the other cylinders either. Like, I could tell when I first cranked it that it sounded weaker. That's no bueno. I guess I'm going to move the tester back to just cylinder number 1. Make sure it still reads the same. Yeah, still 104, 105. Well, that sucks. Not sure why cylinder number 6 would be, 25% lower than most of the other cylinders. we'll try it once more, I guess. $87. Yeah, cylinder 6 is down on compression a little bit. Not exactly what I wanted to see. Well, that's not really how I expected that to go. Cylinder number 6 appears to be down on compression a little bit for some reason. Cylinders 1 through 5 were all looking really good, all within 10% of each other. And then cylinder number 6 came back anywhere from 20 to 30% lower than any of the other cylinders. So, in an effort to kind of try and figure out whether the issue lies in the bottom end or the top end, I'm going to do what they call a wet compression test of cylinder number 6. Basically what that consists of is just applying a small amount of oil in through the spark plug hole, trying to get it around the edge of the piston, and if the compression goes up, that tells me that there's likely a problem in the bottom end, whether it be the cylinder walls are damaged and or the piston is damaged, or the piston rings. There might be an issue with the rings. So if the compression stays the same, that tells me it's more likely an issue with the cylinder head, which might be, you know, just issues with the valves not seating properly, or maybe a head gasket, which I highly doubt it's an issue with the head gasket. Usually a head gasket will, you know, present itself in other ways, like blowing coolant, or if it was a head gasket leak between the cylinders, I would have seen low compression in cylinder number 5 too. So I don't think it's a head gasket issue. If I had to put money down right now, I would say it's a problem with the valves not seating properly, because the last time I built the engine, I had to have the entire cylinder head reworked because some of the valves were not seating properly. So I'm actually hoping at this point that that's what it is, as opposed to some damage or issues with the bottom end. So yeah, I just found, I guess it's like a syringe and a little piece of hose that I just shoved onto the end of it, and what I'm going to try to do is kind of direct the oil as I'm spraying it just around the cylinder the best I can, because it doesn't really do much good to pool a bunch of oil right on top of the piston. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get it around the edge of the piston on the rings and stuff. So that's the idea anyway. We'll see how it goes. Alright, so it's actually a couple days later. I just ran out of time the other day to do the wet compression test, and it actually ended up being kind of a good thing, because it gave me time to kind of sit down and think about my options. And what I realized is I might as well do a wet compression test for all of the cylinders, because I need to know how the addition of engine oil into the cylinder will affect the good cylinders, right? So this will give me a good way to compare the wet results between cylinders to help me better figure out if there's something wrong in the bottom end or the top end of cylinder number 6. So what I'm going to do is, just starting again with cylinder number 1, apply a little bit of engine oil and then test it, and then move on to cylinder number 2. So hopefully pretty close to the same procedure for all 6 cylinders, so we should get some pretty consistent results. And I just want to see how the good cylinders compare to cylinder number 6. Alright, got some oil down into cylinder number 1. Got the compression tester hooked up. So this will be wet test of cylinder number 1. About 114. Okay. Alright, oil is in cylinder number 2. Got the compression tester hooked up. $124. So again, looking at my notes, it's right about 9 psi higher than when it was dry. So far consistent between 1 and 2. Alright, we're hooked up to cylinder number 3 after the exact same amount of oil has been squirted down in the cylinder. So we'll see how number 3 does. Right at 120. So we'll call it an even 120. That is exactly 10 psi higher than the dry test. Okay, now we're on cylinder number 4. Same amount of oil. Compression testers hooked up. We'll call it 117. Alright, here goes cylinder number 5 wet test. $124. Okay, moment of truth. Here we go with cylinder number 6, wet compression test. Right around 96, looks like. So that is, again, about 10 psi higher than the dry test, which to me seems like good news, right? Alright, so I'm just kind of checking out my results here after finishing the wet compression test of all the cylinders. I don't know if you guys will be able to even see this, but I'll throw the results here up on the screen somewhere so you guys can check them out. The difference of compression as far as wet versus dry was extremely consistent across all 6 cylinders. So every single cylinder saw about a 9 or 10 psi increase in compression. So all things considered, that's actually pretty good news to me, because it tells me that the loss of compression for cylinder number 6 is likely not being caused by an issue with the bottom end of the engine. You know, there's always, I guess, a small chance that maybe the number 6 connecting rod is slightly bent or something weird like that, but I find that pretty unlikely, you know, considering the connecting rods that I'm running and the power level that I'm at. So the loss of compression, like I mentioned before, if I had to guess, is more likely due to something on the cylinder head side, and it's probably just a couple of valves that aren't quite seating properly, and in turn causes a slight leak and loss of compression. So what I'll probably end up doing now is actually just putting it back together and keep driving the dang thing the way it is. If I was already working on something else in the engine, you know, if the turbo was already off, the exhaust manifold was already removed, then I would think about pulling the cylinder head off and having it checked, but I'm not going to do that right now just for a couple of slightly leaking valves. Instead, in a couple months down the road, I'll probably do another compression test just to make sure things aren't progressively getting much worse, because, you know, you do want to keep an eye on something like this, otherwise it can create bigger problems which are ultimately a lot more expensive to fix. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for this one. As always, thank you guys for watching and supporting the channel. If you have any input or questions or anything, don't forget to leave it in a comment below, and I will catch you guys in the next one. See ya.